Back for more, huh? Well, alright. Let's learn Greek together. Vocabulary. Let's do it. We're going to see some adjectives here. For example, we have agathos, and then we see a couple different endings here. We got agathe and agathon. Adjectives change based on the declension of the noun. So these are pretty much three different forms of this adjective. Agathos, masculine; agathe, feminine; agathon, neuter. Good or noble. Hagios, hagia, hagion. Holy or consecrated. Gar. For. This is another post-positive word, which again means that you won't ever find it at the beginning of a clause. Dikaios, dikaia, dikaion. Righteous or just. Eskatos, eskate, eskaton. Think eschatology. Last. Kakos, kake, kakon. Bad or evil. Kalos, kale, kalon. Think kaleidoscope. Good or beautiful. Lambano. I take or I receive. Mikros, mikra, mikron. Think microscope. Small or little. Nekros, nekra, nekron. Dead. Ha, he, ta. Different forms of the. Again, based on masculine, feminine, and neuter. Ha, he, ta. Pistos, piste, piston. Similar to pisteo, the verb I believe. And it's an adjective meaning faithful or believing. Poneros, ponera, poneron. Wicked or evil. Protos, prote, proton. Think prototype or proto-evangelion. First, let's take a look at the forms and the syntax of the definite article, the. There are 24 different ways to say the word the in Greek, and it has to do with both the number, the gender, and also the form. So that might seem pretty intimidating at first, but it's actually okay. If you took the time to memorize the paradigms in the previous lessons, you'll see some similarities here. So this is singular, the for singular words. For masculine, we see ha, u, tu, to, ton. For feminine, we see he, tes, te, ten. And for neuter, we see ta, tu, to, ta. Again, the reason why we shouldn't necessarily be intimidated by this is because the endings are very similar to the nouns themselves. So remember, the endings to the masculine nouns are os, u, o, on. Here we see ha, tu, to, ton. Very similar. Same thing with the feminine. We remember it is a, ace, a, ain, and here we see he, tes, te, tain. Very similar. Same thing with neuter. On, u, o, on, and here we see ta, tu, to, ta. So if you remember the other paradigms, these will come easily as well. Similarly, for the plural, we see in the masculine, hoi ton tois tus, hai ton tais tas, ta ton tois ta. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The syntax of the definite article in Greek is similar in many ways to the way that it's used in English. In general, the definite article limits, identifies, or defines. But here are some of the major differences. First, Biblical Greek sometimes uses the definite article with proper names. For example, in the Gospels, you'll often see the Savior's name preceded by a definite article, or in the Septuagint, you'll see Moses in the same way and David in the same way too. In those cases, translators don't typically translate the like you don't see the David or the Moses. The second thing is that in Greek, certain abstract nouns like life, love, peace, and truth have that definite article where we normally wouldn't find it in English. For example, the phrase the word of truth would be in Greek hologos tes aletheas, literally the word of the truth, but translated the word of truth. Thirdly, sometimes in Greek we'll see the definite article behind monadic nouns. Monadic nouns are those things where typically people think of them as being the only one of them. For example, what literally is ho kurios tu uranu kai tes geis, which is literally the Lord of the heaven and the earth, would normally be translated as the Lord of heaven and earth. But it's not consistent in either English or Greek, and so the translator kind of has to use the appropriate English idiom when they're translating. As we mentioned earlier, the endings of these definite articles are pretty similar to that of those first and second declension nouns. But notice again that in the nominative singular and in the accusative singular in the neuter noun, they don't end with a nu as they do in the noun. For example, ta ergon or ta ergon. Let's take another look at 4 other forms too. The masculine and feminine forms of both the nominative singular and the nominative plural are what we call proclitics. Ha, he, hoi, and hai. They sound so similar to the following word that they don't have an accent of their own. Notice too that there's no vocative form of the definite article. Next, let's take a look at the forms of the first and second declension adjectives. First, let's take a look at the singular paradigm. Again, pretty easy to memorize because it's very similar to the endings of the nouns themselves. Remember, and we'll just ignore the vocative for now. Os, u, o, on. Sounds similar, right? Similar for the feminine. E, es, e, en. On, u, o, on. Os, u, o, on. E, es, e, en. On, u, o, on. And similarly for the plural. Oi, on, ois, us. I, on, ais, as. A, on, ois, a. First and second declension adjectives are so called because their feminine forms are declined in the first declension and their masculine and neuter forms in the second declension. For the feminine adjectives, you might see that mixed form that we learned in a couple lessons ago when we were talking about first declension feminine nouns. The easiest way to remember whether your adjective is going to be ending in an alpha or an eta is in the os form of the word. If it's preceded by an epsilon, an iota, or a rho, then that feminine form is going to end in a long alpha. For example, mikros or dikaios. If it preceded by anything else besides epsilon, iota, or rho, then it's going to be an eta. Confusing enough for you? So in eschatos and kalos, the os is not preceded with epsilon, iota, or a rho, and so that feminine is going to be eschaté and kale. Well, let's talk about the syntax of adjectives. You may have noticed this already, but adjectives, including definite articles, match in gender, case, and number with the nouns that they modify. Thus we have kalos logos, a good word, kale ge, a good land, kalon ergon, a good deed. There are three types of adjectives. Attributive adjectives identify or describe a noun by attributing some sort of quality to it. So in a phrase, a good deed, good is the attributive adjective. Predicate adjectives are used with a linking verb, like to be or to become. It asserts something about the noun rather than just identifying it. So for example, in the phrase, a deed is good, good is the predicate adjective. In English, that might seem very minor, but in Greek, it's important. Attributive and predicate constructions are going to play a really important role when it comes to the interpretation of Greek participles. In Greek, attributive adjectives usually appear in one of two different constructions. Either between the noun and its article, so to kalon ergon, the good deed, or that's upside down. Or it follows the noun and has its own article, to ergon, to kalon. That's also translated the good deed. The first construction places emphasis on the adjective, while the second places emphasis on the noun. Predicate adjectives appear in different constructions. It can either precede the noun and its article, like kalon to ergon. Darn it. Or it can follow the noun with no repetition of the article, to ergon kalon. Both of these mean the deed is good. Again, it puts a slight emphasis on whatever comes first. Note that the verb is actually implied in the construction and thus is omitted. The easiest way to distinguish between the attributive and the predicate adjectives is whether or not there's a definite article before the adjective. If there is, it's usually attributive. If it's not, then it's predicate. Stop! Sometimes there's no article at all, including with the noun. In those cases, it's all about the context that's going to help us determine whether it's attributive or predicate. For example, kalon ergon can either mean a good deed or a deed is good, depending on the context. So we have attributive adjectives, predicate adjectives, and then we have substantive adjectives. In this case, there is no noun, and the adjective itself acts as the noun. This is done in English when we speak of the poor and the rich, and so on. Whereas in English, when we do that, we're usually talking about a plural number of persons. In Greek, it can talk about singular or plural, and it can be talking about persons or things. So both the number and the gender are going to be important when it comes to this kind of adjective. For example, a substantive adjective that is both plural and feminine in the Greek might have the translator supply the word women. A substantive adjective that is plural and masculine might be talking about a group of men, but when you have a mixed group of both men and women, then the Greek used that masculine plural form. The substantive adjective is usually accompanied by the definite article, but that's not always the case. And so, ta agatha, or just agatha by itself, can both mean good things. And that does it for this episode. Join us next time for Crash Course in Greek.